I guess I'll turn this thing on, couldn't I? Okay, yeah, we're talking about dendritic spines and how intricate they can potentially be. As you can see, there's a lot of different shapes. Cup shape, mushroom shape, stubby, thin, filopodium are the 5 different shapes. And they allow us to learn something almost instantaneously and remember it. And that's a good thing. The axon projects from the soma in an expanded area known as the axon hillock. And this is the axon hillock right here. Electrical impulse begins in the widened hillock and intensifies as it moves into the narrower axon proper. And of course, the electrical charge that we're dealing with starts wide and then it narrows down, and that's what makes it accelerate through the axon to the axon terminal. Almost all neurons have only one axon. However, some have axons that divide and form several branches. This branching is known as axon collaterals. So, and that happens with neurons as well, obviously. It happens with neurons, I just said it did, so maybe it does. When someone smashes their finger, the stimuli must follow a nerve pathway to tell the brain what has happened. Nerves that take stimuli from its point of origin to the central nervous system are called afferent neurons, so the ones that take it in start with an A, and luckily they used almost the same word for the ones that take it back to the injured site. Efferent neurons are the ones that take it back. Afferent neurons take it to the central nervous system, and the message that is sent back to the injured area goes through a pathway referred to as efferent neurons. Afferent and efferent. The soma manufactures proteins that maintain growth and function in the neuron. This protein is able to make its way down into the distant areas of the axon and dendrites by a process known as axonal transport. And now we're going to get into pharmaceuticals. Now we're going to start talking about ways that pharmaceuticals can block things. Because they can, as I said before, you've got sodium channels and you've got potassium channels. You've also got calcium channels. And that leads to the firing of the neuron. And we can block the sodium channel, or we can slow the sodium channel down, or we can slow the potassium channel down, or we can block the calcium channel, the axon won't fire. And these are all pharmaceuticals. Now, as I keep telling you guys, pharmaceuticals are toxins, they're poisons, and that's the reason that they work. So no matter what it is that you're taking, it has to be cleared from your system. So if you're taking a blood pressure medicine, despite the fact it's keeping you alive, it's still a toxin, and it has to be cleared from your system by your liver. Any medicine that you take is a toxin. And it does something potentially negative to your system. And that's one of the things that you have to remember about medications. And that's why they work. If they weren't poisons, they wouldn't work. Alcohol. Almost all the drugs that you take, all the illicit drugs that you take, cocaine, and methamphetamines, barbiturates, all of these things are alkaloids, and that's the reason that they affect your system so much. Tobacco, nicotine. The nicotine in tobacco is an alkaloid, and that's why it affects your system so much. People like the feeling, and that's why they do it. They poison themselves. It makes them feel, it changes their neurons and makes them feel different, and that's the reason they continue to do it over and over and over and over again. So when we're talking about pharmaceuticals, we're talking about something that is disrupted. The protein is moved along tiny hollow cylinders known as microtubules. So we can slow this process down, or we can stop it completely with medication. The medication will block the microtubules from functioning. There are a number of pharmaceuticals out there that work on the microtubules. Protein molecules travel down smaller rods into the microtubules, called neurofilaments, and even tinier microfilaments. And of course, we can disrupt both of these as well. And this is the reason that pharmaceuticals work. Now, the reason that it takes 5 to 10 years to get a drug approved is because they need to test it. They need to test it on animals. They need to overdose the animals and see what happens to them. Once they don't get a negative reaction from the animals, then they can start testing it on humans. But the reality is that all humans aren't the same. It would be nice, as far as the pharmacies or the pharmaceutical companies are concerned, if all humans were the same. But obviously they're not. If we talk to people, are you drinking coffee? Does it affect you at all? Does it wake you up? Does it keep you awake at night? Does it make you shaky? If you stop drinking coffee, do you get a headache?
Yeah.
Okay.
The headache part, and then that extra boost in the morning.
Okay, so it actually wakes you up in the morning. If I drink caffeine, it doesn't do anything. Doesn't do jack to me. Nothing. Doesn't touch me at all. I can drink a bottle of Mountain Dew and go right to sleep. So we're not the same. I mean, obviously you and I aren't the same, but humans aren't the same. So we have a certain percentage of people that react negatively to things. You can probably, if you hurt your ankle, they'll tell you to take a analgesic and an anti-inflammatory, and they'll probably prescribe ibuprofen. And it's great. It's a wonderful analgesic. It's a wonderful anti-inflammatory. But I can't take it because when I take it, it makes me depressed. About 5% of the population has the same effect that I do. And these are the reasons that they need to check the drug. Hopefully it doesn't kill anybody, but different people have different side effects to these drugs. 95% of the population can take ibuprofen without any problem, and 5%, if they take it, they become almost suicidal.
Right.
It's that bad.
I use, there's a brief I use ibuprofen, or I had the heel spurt. It would inflame, and then just carefully taking it maybe twice a week during work hours.
Correct.
Just numb it up and
Sure.
get back home would be like trying to get from one side to the next.
I'm limping along like Chester.
Yeah. So they told me you can exercise it, or you can do it for operation. I chose exercise it. Healed up by itself.
Oh, it healed up by itself?
Yeah.
Wow.
So I've been doing like a lot of calves and a lot of stretching, and putting a towel down like this, like a cat.
Wow.
Like this little feet. The muscle part actually just lifted the whole.
Correct.
The whole arch part. My arch muscle came from
Correct.
So now it's just.
Isn't that
exercising?
fascinating?
Exercising actually. It's made it a lot better without taking medicine.
That's great. That's great. However, you're one of the 95%. You can take ibuprofen.
Yeah.
Okay. If you were one of the 5%, if I take ibuprofen, if I take it more than once, then I'm almost suicidal. I mean, I feel like I'm the most depressed person in the world. I'm crawling around on my belly. The whole world turns gray. I mean, it's really kind of bizarre. So not everybody has the same reaction, and this is the reason why the FDA just doesn't blanket approve anything, because they need to make sure that not everybody will have the same reaction. Once upon a time, they had a diet drug called Fin-Fin. Actually, it's two different drugs. Okay, you remember Fin-Fin. The problem was that Fin-Fin was okay for a relatively large percentage of the population, but for people with a certain heart condition, it gave them what they call cardiomyopathy, and they would die from taking Fin-Fin. And one of the reasons, of course, they were overweight, and one of the reasons they were overweight was because their heart anomaly had reduced the amount of exercise they could get.
Yeah.
Now, my wife took Fin-Fin, when she was in service, trying to lose weight.
Yeah.
And she had no problem with it at all. But she had a friend who took it, who was a civilian. She took it, she died. Killed her.
I remember a lot of reports of that from common deaths or from people trying to lose weight.
Yeah. You certainly couldn't, you can't overdose on it because they were both amphetamines. Both drugs were amphetamines. Anyway, so everything needs to be checked, and well, we're talking about all the way that pharmaceuticals can work, and people aren't the same. Everybody isn't the same. We metabolize substances differently, and so this is one of the things we have to think about when we're going to pass a drug or legalize a drug in the United States. A lot of drugs are legal in Europe, they're legal in Mexico, they're legal in Canada, but they're illegal in the United States. They've never been approved by the FDA. Glial cells are part of a neuronal system in that they provide structure to the neuronal groupings and help hold them in place, and they help maintain the neurons by feeding them. There's 4 types of glial cells, and it has to do with their structure, what they look like. Astrocytes look like stars. Microglial cells are really tiny. Oligodendrocytes look like trees, and Schwann cells are glial cells that wrap around neurons to protect them. Astrocytes are star-shaped glial cells that protect neuronal bundles, especially in the brain. The dura mater is a hard covering, not a hard covering, that's not. It is a thick covering, so it's like it is a membrane, is what it is. The dura mater is a membrane that covers the brain and protects it. So, and it will protect it from normal things. Of course, if you shoot a bullet through somebody's head, then the dura, it just shatters. It doesn't shatter it. It just punches a hole right through the dura mater. But if it was something relatively simple, it could potentially stop it. If you've ever seen brain surgery, yeah, they have to cut it, and it's relatively thick. It's kind of a gray to white covering.
The white covering. My nephew had a brain trauma. They cut the swelling was so big that they cut this side, and you could see the.
Oh, you could see the brain functioning.
The white brain part you're talking about?
Yeah. That was the dura mater. That's kind of cool. It's a tough sheet that is wrapped around the brain for protection, and it is composed of astrocytes. Astrocytes are star-shaped, and since they're star-shaped, they can tie themselves together in a very intricate pattern. And because of that, of course, they can form this dura mater. Astrocytes contribute to the metabolism of the neurons, and they provide restorative protein to the neurons, and that is the way it works. So they feed the neurons as well as protect them. Microglial cells are very small. They migrate to the areas of the injury or disease and remove debris from injured or dead neurons. And it is microglial cells that are working when someone starts to suffer from Alzheimer's disease. These are the cells that go in and clean everything out. The glial cells that do that. And of course, if there's too much destruction, if it's rapid onset Alzheimer's disease, there's just too much work for these guys to do, and they can't do it anymore. And it just builds up very, very rapidly. Robin Williams was diagnosed with rapid onset Alzheimer's disease, and that's why he committed suicide. So that was one of the reasons he committed suicide. Now, why in the world would he have rapid onset Alzheimer's disease?
Drugs.
Yeah.
Drugs using.
Yeah, he was a cocaine user, heavy cocaine user. Yeah. It shocks your system, and it stays with you forever. So, he had a very successful career. His humor was beyond anything anybody had ever seen before. Unfortunately, it was fueled by cocaine, and he died in his early 60s. He committed suicide in his early 60s, but he probably wouldn't have survived to 70 with his rapid onset Alzheimer's disease. It's the price you pay, I guess. One way of looking at it. Oligodendrocytes are myelin sheaths that surround and protect the neurons and are created by glial cells. These myelin sheaths not only protect the neuron, but they accelerate the response of the neuron. The thing about oligodendrocytes is these are in the brain. Outside the central nervous system, oligodendrocytes are the myelin of the brain and of the central nervous system. The Schwann cells are the myelin cells for outside the central nervous system. Oligodendrocytes provide the myelin in the brain, the spinal cord, and it means a little tree cell. And as you can see, it does look like a little tree to some extent, I guess. Schwann cells construct the myelin outside the brain, the spinal column. They are small, and each one will wrap itself around the axon to protect it and accelerate the response. The Schwann cells are the cells that deteriorate in cases of multiple sclerosis, so that the individual eventually, in the beginning of multiple sclerosis, you start losing your ability to move properly, and it slowly degenerates to the point where the individual's in a wheelchair, and then eventually they die. Who had multiple sclerosis? Annette Funicello. Somebody. Beach blanket bingo.
Okay, the one the co-star with Frankie Avalon.
Frankie Avalon, yeah. Yeah, that lady with black hair and big chest. She was very popular, very Italian. She was full-blooded Italian, as interesting as that is. When they look at the myelin formed around an axon, you will see the Schwann cells don't touch each other, but they leave a gap between each cell. These are known as nodes of Ranvier. And of course, that accelerates the charge as it's moving through the cell. When an individual suffers a blow to the head, the injury tends to heal slower than a blow to any other part of the body. And this is one of the reasons why concussions are so serious. And now they have concussion criteria that you have to be able to answer select questions. You can't slur your words in order to go back into a contest, such as a baseball game or a football game. So if someone is dizzy, that they have to pull them out of the game. They can't allow them to play again until they fulfill the concussion criteria. So what they're trying to do is keep people from playing when they have a concussion. This happens in baseball. I guess it happens in football too. They have it in basketball as well. In the National Basketball Association, they utilize this. College sports uses it, of course. And the problem is that, of course, head injuries don't heal nearly as rapidly. This is because besides causing localized damage, the glial cells become larger by taking on moisture. And the reason they take on moisture is to protect the neuron. They're trying to keep that neuron from dying. If the injury is continuous, if it happens over and over again, then potentially that neuron will die. Now you've lost brain cells. And of course, we have seen this in some of the players in the NFL, the old players in the NFL. Junior Seau, there's a number of them that have committed suicide due to all the concussions that they've had. They've lost enough brain tissue that they've decided that, and it changes your personality. And Junior Seau is really kind of fascinating. He played linebacker. He's really, really good. Played for the San Diego Chargers. He was a Samoan. And one day he got on the surfboard, went out into the ocean, and shot himself. And that's how he committed suicide, was going out in the ocean. Of course, he was an island person. But the problem is, of course, that the brain heals slower than anything else. And one of the reasons is because of all the edema that takes place, the swelling of the glial cells. They take on moisture. And this is one of the reasons why when somebody goes into a coma, despite the fact that the brain injury wasn't that bad, or the head trauma wasn't that bad, sometimes it can take weeks for that, for the individual to regain consciousness. And the reason is because of this edema, the swelling in the brain. They can't relieve it because it's internal. It's not on the surface. It's not like you can punch a hole in the skull and drain out all that excess fluid. The excess fluid is around each neuron, and they have to wait for the glial cells to go back to normal in order for the person to come back.
And my nephew was in a coma for about a month, and they had the fluids coming from here. There were like bags of fluids hanging on. So it was a sight.
I can imagine. He's okay now.
Yeah, he's good.
Okay.
He's trying to adjust, but he has like multiple seizures ever since like about a month after he's been
Sure.
given. They're trying to figure out what's causing these seizures.
Obviously, there was damage done. There may have been some destruction. The damage had to do with edema, but also some of those neurons didn't make it. So, and it changes your personality. It changes everything. So potentially that's what we're dealing with now. How old is he?
He's young. He's like 19.
Wow.
I think it happened when he was 19. When he recovered really fast, the recovery was pretty fast, but when he was to where he can be on his own, and I think he started getting these seizures then. He can't drive.
Isn't that weird? The weird thing is that while he was in the coma, of course, he wasn't having seizures. Right after he came out of his coma, he wasn't having seizures. And then as the brain started healing, then it recognized the deficits. It recognized the holes in his brain, the neurons that had died, and that's when the seizures started. That's kind of interesting. Automobile accident?
Skateboarding. He was coming down one of the steepest hills. It was I don't know. We always press helmets for him, but this time,
Kind of stuff happens, doesn't it? The nervous system of the human body can be subdivided into two nervous systems. The central nervous system comprises the brain and its spinal cord, and then everything else is a peripheral nervous system. So you have two nervous systems, and that's what they look like. This is the brain and the spinal column, and that's all the other neurons in the body. So you have a peripheral nervous system and a central nervous system. The peripheral nerves are categorized by what part of the central nervous system they are connected to. Cranial nerves are connected directly to the brain. Spinal nerves are connected directly to the spinal column. Autonomic nerves in the autonomic nervous system are connected to glands and organs and trigger automatic responses from these areas. So there's three different places that they are attached to. They're either attached directly to the brain, directly to the spine, or they are in throughout the body, and they do automatic things, the peripheral nervous system. There are 12 cranial nerves that control sensory or muscular movements in the head or the neck region. 4 of the nerves control the muscles of the eye and eye sensations. 4 control the muscles of the neck, face, and tongue, and the sensations of tongue, sinuses, and throat. 1 controls the sensations of the inner ear, and the vagus nerve, of course, controls the heart, lungs, and digestion. Vagus nerve runs from the center of your brain all the way down to the bottom of your gut. So it's a relatively long nerve. There you go. So if you have damage to any of these nerves, we can tell which one it was, or we can tell that it's one of these in this category by what it affects. And of course, if you have a facial injury or a neck injury, a lot of times you'll lose sensation in your tongue, you'll lose the ability to taste, you won't be able to clear your sinuses, you will, yeah, it gets kind of ugly.
I see some people that have like, I'm not sure if it's face injury, I'm not saying it's face injury, but when the face kind of turns itself, the muscle around.
Right, that's probably from a stroke.
Yeah.
There's also a thing called Bell's palsy, where the nerve becomes irritated and it stops functioning. So you lose the ability to hold your muscles intact on one side of your face. So it looks like you've had a stroke, but it's actually, it can be caused by anything. It can be, usually it's caused by the flu, strangely enough, and all of a sudden, you know, all of a sudden half of your face is not intact. And it doesn't have anything to do with the stroke, it has to do with the fact that the flu has affected that nerve, and now that nerve is irritated to the extent that it's not functional anymore, so it can't hold your muscles. Your muscles are flaccid. Normally we can maintain our faces, we can feel our faces, but with Bell's palsy you can't. Dental procedures sometimes will irritate the nerves. I had a friend that, when I was in the service, and his dentist hit the nerve and he hit it too hard evidently, or he sprayed it too hard, or he severed it and it needed to grow back. But he had Bell's palsy on one side of his face. And I knew him for 6 months and it never came back, but they said it would come back, eventually it would come back. Toward the end of the time that I was around this individual, his face did seem to start becoming more animated. So it was slowly, very slowly coming back. Not completely though. There are 31 pairs of spinal nerves, 1 pair on each side of the body. There are 5 segments of the spinal column. The cervical nerves, there are 8 of them. Cervical means color, like the color of your shirt. So that has to do with when you have whiplash. The vertebrae are relatively small in this portion of your neck, and there are 8 cervical nerves that can be affected by whiplash. As we go down the spinal column, there are 12 thoracic nerves. This is in your torso. This is all the way down right to just right at the bottom of the rib cage. Thoracic means brace, as interesting as that is. There are 5 lumbar nerves. Lumbar means belt, and that's the portion from the bottom of your rib cage all the way down to the curve of your butt. The lumbar nerves, these are the ones that people normally injure because they don't lift properly, they try to lift too much weight, they get themselves in a really strange position, and they will maladjust their spinal column, or they will crush their discs, or they will strain a nerve. The muscle there, you have a lot of muscles in your back, and those muscles are there to protect your spinal column. So if somebody lifts incorrectly, if somebody's relatively sedentary and they try to lift too much, they don't work on these muscles, then potentially they can damage these muscles. I'm almost 70 years old and I've never had a lumbar problem. I know. It's hard to find anybody that hasn't done something stupid with their backs, but I have never had any problems with my back at all. But then again, I've been a weightlifter almost all my life. So I have a brother that is almost crippled because he is so cool. He is so cool that, he doesn't have to do things like lift weights and run. He doesn't have to do that kind of stuff. And now he's almost crippled because of something stupid that he did. There are 5 sacral nerves. This is the pelvic girdle. This is around the pelvis. These are the sacral nerves. Normally, these are protected by the pelvis. The pelvis protects the spinal column. So you rarely hurt this area unless you're in an automobile accident. But still, the pelvis is a very rigid structure, and because of that, you very rarely hurt your sacral nerves unless something happens in that area. If you fall on your butt, you may break your tailbone, or you may injure your coccygeal nerve. And there's only one of them, and the reason is because it doesn't need two. That is the point of the spinal column, and you only have one coccygeal nerve. And there you go. That's what it looks like. This is the neck, and as you can see, there's a natural curve in the neck. It keeps our head up. You don't want a straight cervical spinal column. If you had a straight cervical spinal column, you'd be like this.
I think that's how I sleep. I try to get some orthopedic pillows and cushions.
The more of a curve you have in your cervical nerves, the more flexible your neck is. So there are people with some really extreme curves. I've seen a lot of people with whiplash, and when you have whiplash, that spinal column, the cervical spinal column, will straighten out almost completely.
Would that be like sometimes when they have when some people get into accidents, especially automobile accidents, they have these braces sometimes that holds up their neck?
That's usually from a broken neck.
Yeah,
That's
pins and
it's a halo. It's a halo that it's a solid structure here, and then there are pins that hold there. They have to drill it into your skull, in your forehead and the back of your head. But it's to keep your neck stiff, because and you need to heal that, the bone in your cervical vertebra, and that's what has happened. You guys got a broken neck. Now, in the old days, if you had a broken neck, usually what happened was you died, because they had no way of fixing it. But now, of course, if we can get to them soon enough, a lot of times what happens when you have a broken neck is that you stop breathing. But if we can get to this person fast enough, if we can get to them fast enough, we can fix everything. Now, the problem is if somebody has that neck injury, there's always a possibility they have a broken neck. And if you move them, if you move them, then what will happen is this vertebra may become damaged to the extent that it makes them paralyzed. So make them a quadriplegic. So for that reason, if somebody has a possible broken neck, or possible damage to their cervical vertebra, you have to put them on a board. You have to keep them stable. You can't just pick them up and move them. Okay. That's the biggest problem we're having right now, is the fact that anytime somebody is injured, you got to put them on a board. You can't just pick them up and take them out of danger, because you may make them a quadriplegic. It's real serious stuff. The autonomic nervous system is divided into two nervous systems: the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system prepares you for fight or flight. The parasympathetic nervous system returns you to where you were before. So the sympathetic actually prepares you for the whatever danger you're in, and the parasympathetic returns you to where you were. When the need for action is detected, the sympathetic nervous system will dilate your pupils, improving your eyesight. This is automatic. It will inhibit your salivation, causing dry mouth. It can relax your airways, allowing deeper breathing. It can accelerate your heart rate, and of course that allows you to run away. It stimulates your sweat glands, so you get flop sweats. What they call flop sweats. It stimulates your liver to release energy stores, so you have more energy. It slows down your digestion, because your digestion takes up a lot of energy. So it will stop your digestion. So if you're ever in a situation that is irritating or it's dangerous, one of the things that will happen is you won't be hungry for an extended length of time. And that's because your digestion has been truncated. It has ceased. So if you've been in a really strange situation, something happens during the day and you're thinking, oh my goodness, this is fairly traumatic. One of the things that will happen is if you ate something, let's say you ate a taco. If you ate that taco, and of course it only takes 2 hours for food to clear from your stomach, that taco is going to stay in your stomach until the danger passes, until the trauma passes. So potentially you'll be burping taco all day long. I know. Whereas normally, after 2 hours, the taco's gone out of your stomach. And you won't, if you burp, it's not going to taste like taco. But if you've still got taco burps after 5 or 6 hours, you know that something's going on. And your digestion has slowed down to the point of stopping. Because that food is still in your stomach. And of course, if it's like 12 hours later, you're still tasting taco, it'll actually start tasting different because there are digestive juices in there, and whatever's coming up is not exactly what you put down there. So that's just the way it works. So you can tell how whether something is bothering you. You can tell if something has slowed things down by what your burps taste like. And you'll start burping more because it's still down there, and you need to get, and it started fermenting, and that creates methane, and it creates hydrogen gas and methane gas, and so it starts coming back up. Isn't this fun?
Which stress do that too?
So, I'm sorry?
Which stress do that?
Well, all of them will, any of them. So if you're really upset, if you put other food down on top of that, sometimes it'll make you sick. Throw up. This is one of the reasons why people don't get hungry.
Yeah.
This is another reason. This is a reason why when people fall in love, and love is a trauma to some extent. I mean, the feelings and the emotions. Your brain is whirring, and all you can think about is whoever this select individual is. That's one of the reasons why you lose your appetite when you fall in love. Isn't this exciting? We're learning all about love. Okay, so your digestion will slow down to the point of stopping. It will inhibit your kidney function because your kidneys take a lot of energy for them to function. So your kidneys will stop, will slow down to the point of stopping. Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier had a big brawl in the Philippines. Rumble in the jungle. That's right. That's what Ali called it. Rumble in the jungle. So during the fight, it looked like Frazier was going to win. Frazier was doing really, really well. But Ali eventually, in the end, Ali won, and both of them just beat the holy hell out of each other. But Joe Frazier, it's like he was good for 10 rounds, and then all of a sudden, the last 5 rounds, everything slowed down. His punches slowed down. He didn't have the same power behind them, and for that reason, he lost the fight. Well, after the fight, they took him to the hospital, and it turned out that his kidneys had stopped functioning. Now, it's not because his kidneys didn't stop functioning because there was a problem with them. His kidneys had stopped functioning because the sympathetic nervous system had kicked in early, or probably earlier that day, and his kidney function had slowly decreased until it stopped completely. So during the fight, he was okay in the first 10 rounds, but because the fight lasted for such a long time, by the end of the fight, the toxins that were created for not being cleaned out of his system by his kidneys kind of backed up on him, and now all of a sudden everything was slower. This is the first time we'd ever seen this. So this is the first time medicine had ever acknowledged that this could potentially happen. And they referred to it as athlete's kidney, because if an athlete gets too worked up about whatever they're going to do, then potentially they'll have a reaction. So once upon a time in a land far, far away, I was married to my first wife, and she decided she was going to leave me. This is on a Saturday. So all day Saturday, it was just one huge argument. Sunday, she packed her stuff, and we had a daughter at that time. So here she is, she's packing up, throw all this stuff into the car. We drive down the road, get halfway home, which is about 50 miles, and she decides, no, I'll stay with you. So we turned around, came all the way back, unpacked the car. The next morning I had student teaching. I was training to be a teacher. I had student teaching in the morning. So I did that, went back to school. I had a biology lab that I had to do it. So I did that, and right after the biology lab, there was a track meet. So I ran in the track meet, and I was terrible. I was slow. You know, normally I won these events. I won this event and this event and this event. But after each event, I threw up. Now, I mean, I'm only running 110 yards, which is, you know, like from here to there, not very far. But I was throwing up after 110 yards. And then I ran the 220, and I threw up after the 220. I ran the 440, and I threw up after the 440. And when it came time for the mile relay, I couldn't do it. I was on my stomach, dry heaving. And we almost lost the meet, and it would have been my fault. So they took me to the hospital, and they checked me, and they just realized my kidneys had stopped functioning. I know. I was down for a whole week. I was in the hospital for a whole week, but it was because of athlete's kidney. This is right after Joe Frazier had been hospitalized, and he was hospitalized for a week. So they tried to determine if there was any problem with my kidneys, if there was any damage done to my kidneys, and the answer was no. But it was the problem was that I had athlete's kidney. So I had reacted negatively to all of that stuff that had happened. If it had just been a track meet, I wouldn't have had any problem. But because my wife had given me such a large ration of, you know that stuff, over the weekend, and it had been a really traumatic weekend. I'm not very good at arguing. Yes. Later on, she stabbed me because, like I said, I'm not very good at arguing. And she had had enough of me not being a good arguer, as strange as it may seem. Anyway, okay, so my kidneys stopped functioning. And it was probably had more to do with the argument that I had over the weekend than it did the track meet. It will constrict your blood vessels in your skin, making you pale. Now, why in the world would it constrict your blood vessels? Why is it doing this? You and I are having a sword fight, and I cut your face. And now, because of the adrenaline in your system, because of the sympathetic nervous system, your blood vessels are constricted. So how much are you going to bleed? You're going to bleed to death?
A lot.
Very much.
Yeah. Oh, no?
No, not at all. Because your blood vessels are smaller. So here I'm cutting his face and thinking, aha, I got him now. And he just trickles a little bit of blood out of his cheek. Now, once he, and if you've ever been around somebody that was in a fight, a lot of times, they fight and they've got cuts and stuff and nothing's going on, hardly any blood, and then when the fight ends, all of a sudden they just go.
There was a movie, $12 million Clint Eastwood, where he tells his fighter, you only have a few seconds before it's going to start gushing out. He fixed her face and I said, you only got a couple moves until you take her down, and your face is going to gush out pretty soon, so you better put her away fast. And she did that. So.
Yeah, see, that's exactly what's going on here. So as soon as the battle's over with, then all of your wounds
start pouring blood. Well, not really pouring blood, because they've had a chance to clot over. But of course, the blood starts flowing more freely. During the fight, if you get punched in the eye, your eye potentially won't swell up very much. But as soon as the fight's over with, and as soon as you relax a little bit, your eye just puffs up like a basketball. The parasympathetic nervous system reaction, your pupils constrict so that your eyesight's not nearly as good. It stimulates salivation, so all of a sudden, whereas before you had dry mouth, now all of a sudden, every time you talk, you're spitting at people. It constricts your airways because you don't need to breathe as rapidly now. Your heartbeat will go down, it slows down. It stimulates your digestion, so a lot of interesting things happen after you have, after the trauma has gone away. One of them is you may pass a lot of gas. The other thing is that you may have a bowel movement. You may feel like you need to have a bowel movement, which is really kind of interesting. If you've ever been around these guys, after the battle is over with, everybody runs off into the jungle to take a dump. As confusing as that is, and it's because of all of these things. It dilates your blood vessels in your intestines, and this is one of the reasons why your intestines start working, not really working overtime, but one of the things that happens is it starts moving the food through your system again, whereas it has been stopped. The fermentation is still taking place. Now all of a sudden, everything starts moving again. And that's one of the reasons why you may have bowel movement after the trauma. And that's also a reason why you'll feel like you have a lot of gas in your gut. So you may get a pain in your stomach or in your intestines. Dilates blood vessels in the skin, so your skin will flush. And just like Clint Eastwood told, what was that lady's name? It was in that movie. She got a Academy Award. Yeah, Swank. Yeah, Hilary Swank. Who looks like Jennifer Garner, kinda.
Yeah.
Except a little more slender. The average human brain weighs about 1,400 grams, about 3 pounds. The major part of the brain is the cerebrum, which is divided into 2 hemispheres. As I keep telling you guys, Homo sapiens sapien, who we are, does not have the largest brain of all the hominids that have ever been around. There was an earlier version of human that had a bigger brain. It was Neanderthal man, had a brain that was about 1,750. So it was bigger. The major part of the brain is the cerebrum, of course. It has 2 hemispheres. Intellectual capacity seems to be contained in the surface of the brain, so it's on the surface. If it were closer to the middle, of course, concussions wouldn't make you stupid, potentially. The surface area of the brain is increased through ridges and folding that triples the surface area of the brain. So if you look at a brain, what you see is a lot of bumps and ridges, as curious as that is. The convolutions are called gyri, and the furrows are called sulci. The brain contains 4 fairly distinct lobes that have 4 fairly distinct functions. The frontal lobe is where all the higher level thinking takes place. That's this whole red portion here. The parietal lobe is on top, and it controls body movement, especially fine body movement. That's the yellow portion. The occipital lobe is in the back and controls sight. This is the off yellow color here. And then the temporal lobe is on the side, and it controls your hearing. All very important. All of these things have to do with survival. Hearing, you need to be able to hear your enemies. You need to be able to see your enemies. You need to be able to move adequately to dodge a spear point or whatever. You need to be able to understand where to go and all of these things. So all of the whole brain has to do with survival, especially in a dangerous world. Even if the danger isn't another human, it may be a predator. It may be a lion or tiger or bear. Oh my.
There's a, yesterday we were going to the voting sessions. We're at the intersection of Chinglias. The buses were coming out, and that's that rush hour.
Right.
The buses, we stopped, and then the light in front of us went. We're leaving. The bus already cleared out, and there's just one vehicle that zoomed without stopping. I wasn't driving. My wife was driving, so it was kind of like we stopped. I don't know. It was just that movement of how did we survive?
How did you know that was coming
Yeah,
out?
it
It was
came out.
your peripheral vision. You could see it.
Yes.
And of course, even if she didn't acknowledge it, she felt like she could feel this person coming from this direction.
And at the same time, we both saw it. It was at the same time we were thinking the same thing. And there was another driver on this side, an older gentleman who was coming out, and he saw it right at the same time. So it was just like a split second. And this vehicle was coming out like 60 or 70 or something. It's trying to beat the light. I think if it was bigger vehicles, it would have been a big old smash. And there was some vehicles on this side too. So these are all cars. I don't know, just stop and quick and stop.
So if you'd had pickup trucks, a dually or something, you probably would have had an accident. Yeah. They have a hard time stopping. It's very real. It's a dangerous world out there. If an individual lost half of their brain before they reached puberty, except for some fine motor movements, they would seem perfectly normal. And this is not an uncommon surgery to take out half of somebody's brain. If they're having epileptic seizures and they are uncontrollable, sometimes they will take out half a person's brain. The reality is they don't become a half-wit. They don't become have any problems intellectually after that. The other half of the brain will take up all of the functions of a whole brain, as interesting as that is. And that may be one of the reasons why we have two halves of our brains. We have two kidneys. If one of our kidneys stops functioning, then the other kidney will take up all the functions that two were doing before. That's one of the reasons why we have two testicles. If we lose a testicle, then we have that one testicle will produce enough sperm in order to reproduce, as odd as that may seem. So we are put together to lose pieces of our bodies, potentially. And if we do lose part of our body, it doesn't mean that we're not going to be able to function. The two hemispheres of the brain are connected by a mass of thick myelinated neurons called the corpus callosum. This red portion is a corpus callosum. If you've ever seen a brain, which hopefully you haven't, but if you've ever seen the inside of a brain, of course, it's white. As it turns out, women have a much larger corpus callosum than men do. Men have a larger brain, but women have a larger corpus callosum, which means the two halves of a woman's brain can communicate more readily than a male's. Does this mean anything? Maybe yes, maybe no. People that talk about equality or want to prove that men and women are the same would argue that no, there's no proof that it means anything. And not all women's brains have a larger, 11% larger corpus callosum. That's true. But then again, all humans are different. We can't generalize on just about anything. But it just means that the female brain is a little bit different than the male's brain. Why is the male brain different? Does it have to do with testosterone? The male tends to be larger than the female. His head tends to be larger. His brain tends to be larger. Does that make him smarter? And the answer is obviously no. It's not that much any smarter than anybody else.
So when you say that brain, half of the brain, one half of the brain is, the other side of the brain is not working, and is there a loss there, or do you still?
Well, usually the reason it's not working is because of epileptic seizures. We have seen cases where a person was in continual seizure, or they had seizures every 12 seconds. if that is the case, of course, they become relatively non-functional. It's very difficult to feed this individual. So one of the things that we may potentially do is take out half of the brain. We have medications that will stop the seizures, that will slow them down. Dilantin, carbamazepine, these are both Tegretol. These are all medications that stop seizures or slow them down. But in some cases, it doesn't work. So in that case, if they were having seizures over an extended length of time, one of the things that we might do is take out half of the brain. Take out the half that is affected. And we can tell which part's affected because we can do an MRI.
And so are they able to still like function the way?
Yes.
Really?
Everything is normal. Once we get that epileptic half of the brain out, everything is the same.
Even their memory?
Right, everything.
It's amazing.
It's amazing. Of course, what kind of memories are they trying to remember? Wait a minute, I had a seizure every 12 seconds. So nothing was going on. Not a whole lot was going on. Usually if we can, and actually there is a cutoff point. The human brain matures it matures in fits and starts. And when you don't need part of your brain will prune away those neurons that you don't need anymore. And just take them out. You'll just kill them. Right after you're born, of course, you've got all these really interesting instincts. After about 2 or 3 months, it'll prune all those away, so you don't have that anymore. Language skills, you have this amazing ability to learn language until you're about 12 years old, 9 or 10 or 12 years old. And once you start getting an adult brain, you don't need that anymore, so it will prune that away. So if we can catch these kids before they're 12, before they go through puberty, then they will have, they will see normal, completely normal. If we do this after the age of 12, now we got a problem. Does that make sense? Okay. So we have to catch them early. And if we can catch them early enough, we can take out the damaged portion of their brain, the epileptic portion of their brain, and everything will be fine. And that portion of that section of their head will fill up with cerebrospinal fluid, and they will be just the same as everybody else. They probably will not. The doctors won't want them to participate in contact sports. So no football, no soccer, probably no basketball. They can run as long as they don't get hit in the head. Okay, that's what we're trying to keep them from doing.
So since we're on the subject of brain, I have a cousin that had a heart attack, and she was without oxygen for 30 minutes.
Oh my goodness gracious!
And she had some brain damage on both sides of her brain.
Right.
So, but then you don't know if it was the speech or the vision, like you're saying.
Right.
All that. But is that how does that? Do they come out of that sometimes? I mean, if it's damaged.
How old is
She was 37.
she? Be that way the rest of her life. However, she is a female, and females recover more readily than males do. One of the things that we have noticed is that if somebody has a stroke, male and a female have a stroke, they have exactly the same stroke in exactly the same area, and they have exactly the same amount of damage. She will recover far more readily than female. The male brain is more hardwired, and it may be because of the smaller corpus callosum. And the female brain is more flexible. So there's a possibility that the brain is always trying to fix itself anyway. So potentially what she is lacking, what deficits she has, can be rerouted, and all of a sudden will come back to some extent. 37 is pretty young for her.
Yeah, the doctors told us that, because she wasn't alert, she didn't wake back up. So the doctor said she wasn't functioning well because of her brain.
Mhm.
It wasn't helping her work everything, like,
Sure.
you know, just her movements and her
Right.
speech and all of
Right.
that.
So she lost pieces of everything. I don't know, did she lose pieces of everything? Did she lose her speech? She didn't move as well as she
But
did
she
before?
didn't, she didn't wake up. She wasn't alert.
She was in a coma.
Not in a coma.
She wasn't in a coma. She, okay.
But she just wasn't functioning. She didn't wake up.
So how is she today?
She died.
Oh, she died. She died at 37 from a heart attack.
From a heart attack.
Was she a smoker?
No, it was called a long QT syndrome.
Okay. So she'd always always had a problem.
Yeah. I'm sure, I think, yeah.
Okay. And that's what she thought. Okay. So there's answers for it. Isn't that interesting? Yeah, or not.
But it's strange because she never knew it. She never knew.
No, she was completely unaware. I keep telling you about my friend that had the heart attack from West Virginia, smoker all over his life. He had the same heart attack. His kidneys stopped functioning. His liver stopped functioning. And it was because of the trauma from smoking cigarettes all of his life. So he died. I had the same heart attack, and I didn't, obviously. Well, my kidneys certainly didn't shut down. My liver kept functioning. I didn't have nothing affected any of the rest of my body. But that was because I didn't smoke. He was also a partier, so he drank a lot. But only he was a binge drink type person. So the crap that you do to yourself, I mean, potentially you can kill yourself later on in life. And that's exactly what he did. He died because of his heart attack. I had exactly the same heart attack, and I not only didn't die, but I don't have any damage from my heart. And it's because of the lifestyle. I may be the most boring person in the world, but I'm still alive.
That's what matters.
I don't know.
But
Not according to my first wife and my second wife. They both swore that I was the most boring person in the world, but I'm still alive. If we cross-section an individual's brain, we would see that some of the brain is made up of tightly packed, non-myelinated neurons that look gray. And that's on the surface of the brain. Other areas look white because of the myelinated neurons that make them up. Researchers have found that the larger the gray areas of the brain, the more intelligent the individual is. This is where all your thinking takes place. So if we cut into somebody's brain, what we will see is a layer of gray matter, and it really all depends on the individual as to how thick it is, and right below it will be white matter. Now if we do the same thing with the spinal column, we see the very opposite. In the brain, the gray matter is on the outside and the white matter is on the inside. The spinal column is the opposite. White matter is on the outside and the gray matter is on the inside. As much fun as that is. As the baby begins to develop from ever-expanding number of cells, the brain and the central nervous system begin as a structure known as the neural tube. So it's circular shape. In the beginning, the smaller, more primitive parts of the brain develop before the intellectual portion of the brain, the cerebral cortex. And this is the way it develops. The spinal column develops first, the medulla develops second, the pons third, and the cerebellum develops next. Eventually it will add the cerebrum, but first it has to create a creature that can survive. And in order for it to survive, it needs all four of these structures. This has to do with pons and medulla have to do with movement of information through the spinal cord. The cerebellum have to do with movement. So the first thing that develops is the ability to survive. The cerebellum surrounds two areas that scientists consider an evolutionarily old part of the brain that they sometimes refer to as the reptilian brain. There are two portions of the reptilian brain, the basal ganglia and the limbic system. Basal ganglia means basic nerve sheath, as odd as that may seem, and limbic means the border system. Of course, the limbic system is on the outside, so it's the border. The basal ganglia includes the caudate nucleus, and caudate means tail, the putamen, which means stone, the globus pallidus, the pale sphere, the substantia nigra, nigra means black, the black substance, and those are the portions of the basal ganglia. The limbic system is made up of the amygdala. Amygdala is Latin for almond. The hippocampus, which is Latin for seahorse. The fornix, which means arch. The cingulate gyrus, the round girdle. The olfactory bulb, and the mammillary bodies. That makes up the limbic system. As interesting as that is. If we spoke Latin and Greek, then all of this would make a lot more sense to us. But of course, we don't do that. We don't teach those languages anymore, especially Latin, which is a dead language. The only people that speak Latin now are priests, and the only priests that speak Latin now are when they are trying to communicate, and one guy comes from, I don't know, China, and the other guy comes from Africa or something, then they'll speak Latin. The Bible, of course, was originally not written in Latin. It was written in Aramaic. It was written in Greek. So biblical scholars will study ancient Greek in order to be able to read the Bible, which makes it very difficult. Stupid. So it's a lot of fun. I don't know if you've ever been around biblical scholars, but they argue. The thing about ancient Greek is that they didn't have a space between words. So you couldn't tell what was one word and what was another word. All the letters were just jammed together. So what you had to do was you had to look at it and you had to say, well, that makes a word, and then you put a mark, and then that makes a word, then you make another mark. Of course, sometimes these series of letters, they could say 2 or 3 different things, right? Because you can make the break in different places. And that's really the part of the problem with the Bible. It was originally written in Greek and Aramaic, and the Greek was interpretive rather than specific, absolute. The largest organism in the center of the brain is the thalamus. Thalamus is another word for inner chamber. In the beginning, we thought the thalamus was really, really, really important. Turned out it wasn't that important. The thalamus acts as a connector between the upper and the lower parts of the brain. So it's kind of like a conductor. It allows this piece of information to go through. But it really doesn't do anything else. It just kind of guides information from one place to another. The real controlling gland in the brain is the hypothalamus, which is really kind of confusing. The thalamus is huge, the hypothalamus is not so big. Hypothalamus, as you can see, is much smaller. This is the thalamus right here. This structure right there is the thalamus. And as you can see, it's much larger than the hypothalamus. But the hypothalamus is just full of nerves. And it controls everything. It controls the entire body. The hypothalamus is called the hypothalamus or lesser thalamus because it is below the thalamus. It's its position. That's why it's called that. In reality, this tiny portion of the brain controls your hunger, tells you when to eat and when to stop eating. It controls your thirst, tells you when to drink. It regulates your temperature, so it keeps you warm in the cold, and it keeps you cool in the heat. So it's extremely important. It controls your reproductive behavior. So the desire to reproduce comes from this portion of your brain. It controls the pituitary gland, which controls almost all the body's hormone secretions. And since it controls the pituitary, which used to be called the master gland, haven't heard anybody call it the master gland for a long time, but since it controls the pituitary, it controls everything else. Controls your metabolism, controls your energy stores, just controls everything. So the hypothalamus is an extremely important organ. I have a friend, he had a brain tumor. they decided that they were going to use radiation. So they cooked the tumor right out of his head. Isn't that nice? Unfortunately, right beside the tumor was the hypothalamus. And they cooked his hypothalamus too. So now he has to take medications to do all this stuff. He has to take medications every morning and every evening. It's really fascinating to watch him pouring out all of his pills and taking all of his pills.
So, could that affect the thyroid, like people with thyroid problems?
The pituitary controls the thyroid.
Where's that pituitary?
The pituitary gland is right here. This little P-shaped structure right there.
Oh, can't see it down
Yeah, it's
below,
right
okay.
there. That's pituitary. Yeah, it's right below the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus, the neurons from the hypothalamus extend down into the pituitary to control it. And the pituitary gland controls a lot of different things, including the thyroid. Thyroid is a fascinating, we're going to talk about the thyroid. It's a really fascinating organ.
No, it's like, I want to do my paper on that.
Oh, perfect.
Hormones, it affects the hormones and thyroid
Yeah.
together.
Now, interestingly, there are groups, there are different genetic structures of American Indians who have thyroid problems.
Right, and I see that a lot.
Yeah.
A lot of people who have
Yeah.
thyroid problems.
It's completely different from the Caucasian world or the African American world or the Hispanic, well, not the Hispanic world because some Hispanics are more Indian than they are Spanish. These are primarily northern plains Indians that we see, where we see it. Or, well,
And I find that fascinating.
I wonder if it has to do with buffaloes, because it seems like the really serious buffalo hunters are the ones that have thyroid problems. Yeah, I wonder what it has to do with.
I don't know. I was thinking, that's what my thinking is, and I'm kind of like doing some research on it, and I'm wanting to do something on that. And I thought, gosh, I always hear a lot of like natives, and even especially in general in my family,
Right.
a lot of them have thyroid problems.
Right.
And I'm like, why?
Hypothyroid or hyperthyroid?
Hypo and hyper.
Oh, both?
Yes,
Okay.
my cousin, it's the generation, the younger generation is the hyper. And my aunt and their generation is hypo.
Hypo.
So, I'm like, what is the difference? Why is it so different? You know what I mean?
It's actually a function of the T4 or the thyroxine. Thyroxine is the hormone that the pituitary sends down to the thyroid gland to tell it how much T4 to put out. As interesting as that is. I wonder if those people that are hyperthyroid now will become, if they become sedentary, if they slow down, they'll become hypothyroid. Yeah. Unregulated thyroid glands. Fascinating. Now the thyroid gland, interestingly enough, the thyroid gland contains about 100 days worth of stuff. 100 days. So it can maintain itself for 100 days. You could stop the thyroid gland from functioning, from producing more T3 and T4, and it would still have enough stores in it for 100 days worth of functioning. So you got 100 days to fix your thyroid, I guess. It's really fascinating. So if something happens to you and you damage your thyroid, you're going to be okay for 100 days, and then all of a sudden everything's going to go south. Like, as curious as that is. So it's hard. It's really hard for doctors to diagnose anything because we've got all these stores going on. You've got all this buildup of T3 and T4 in your thyroid gland. So it's hard to tell what's going on. Thyroid's a tough one. Two of the most important areas of the midbrain are the tiny bumps known as the superior and inferior colliculi. Colliculi is a word that means trough. The superior colliculi receives visual information. The inferior colliculi receives information about sound. When you take When you take LSD, a lot of times it affects your superior and inferior colliculi. And so these two get crossed. And all of a sudden you start hearing, seeing sounds and you know, it just gets them crossed. So you start having these psychedelic experiences. The substantia nigra, the black substance, releases dopamine. And of course, if the substantia nigra isn't pumping out enough dopamine, the individual stops functioning properly. And the way they stop functioning is they start forgetting things and they have problems moving. They get what is called Parkinsonian symptoms or Parkinson's disease. Now you can give yourself Parkinson's disease by taking select drugs. If you take a lot of amphetamines, or if you snort a lot of cocaine, then potentially you're going to start having Parkinsonian symptoms.
Is that the same with Michael J. Fox?
Yeah.
The opposite of it?
Michael J. Fox used a lot of cocaine when he first came down to Hollywood. He started using cocaine. Especially when he became a star. He almost became a TV star right away. Yeah, he got that Family Matters or Family Ties or something. Anyway, he was on a television show. Then he started making movies. And of course, he used cocaine. By the time he made Doc Hollywood, he was only in his late 20s, early 30s when he made Doc Hollywood. He was starting to have Parkinsonian symptoms. And does he have Parkinson's disease in his family? I'm not really sure. But I can tell you that it was created by his cocaine habit. He was a big drinker too. Drank a lot of Canadian beer, which is a lot stronger than American beer. Anyway, so he developed Parkinsonian symptoms. Decrease of dopamine will cause Parkinson's disease. An increase of dopamine will cause schizophrenia. So this is not something you want to mess with. You really don't want to mess with this part of your brain. Otherwise you'll have problems. We need to stop right here. We'll pick this up next time with reticular activating system.